Expropriation of the third world, a process that's been going on for about 400 years, perpetrated by the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the Belgians, the French, the English, and most recently, most successfully, most impressively, by the Americans. That is by the ruling classes of these countries, not by the ordinary people. The ordinary people simply paid the costs of empire. The ordinary people simply sent their sons off to die on the plains of India or in the jungles of the Congo or in Latin America, wherever else. But that expropriation of the third world has been going on for 400 years, brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
Welcome for a very special Friday edition of the show. That was a piece, a very small piece of a Michael Parenti speech about there are no poor countries. The whole thing's like an hour. I can't play the whole thing, but I wanted to give you a taste of it so you get an idea of what we're going to dig into in the show today. So without any further ado, let me bring in my homie, my dog. He's working on his book, which we're all very excited about. Pascal Robert.
My brother Jason Miles, comrade, how are you, good brother?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about today.
All right.
I went and got and I dropped the ball. I was supposed to mail Pascal an earlier book that our guest wrote, The Darker Nations. I got two. I lagged on mailing it to him. And in my lagging, I did get this as well. I lagged on getting this to you too. This is the latest book from our guest, Vijay Prashad. I want to read this before I bring him in. Here in the South, where raw materials are in abundance, decolonization had become the main framework by the 1940s. Washington's bullets that pointed towards the USSR remained unused, but its bullets were fired into the heart of the South. It was in the battlefields of the South that Washington pushed against Soviet influence and against the national liberation projects, against hope and for profit. Liberty was not to be the watchword of the new nations that broke away from formal colonialism. Liberty is the name of a statue in the New York harbor. Imperialism is powerful. It attempts to subordinate people to maximize the theft of resources, labor, and wealth. Anyone who denies the absolute obscenity of imperialism needs to find another answer to the fact that the richest 22 men in the world have more wealth than all the women in Africa, or the richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. You would have to have an answer for the reason why we continue to suffer from hunger, illiteracy, sickness, and the indignities of various kinds. You cannot simply say that there are no resources to solve these problems, given that tax havens hold at least 32 trillion, more than the total value of gold that has been brought to the surface. It is easy to bomb a country, harder yet to solve the pressing problems of its peoples. Imperialism's only solution to these problems is to intimidate people and to create dissension amongst people. This is a small excerpt from the beginning of the book from our guest, Mr. Vijay Prashad.
Hey, listen, it's a joy to be here. And I have to say, Jason, Pascal, I want to thank my friend Joe Sacco for introducing us. And Joe Sacco, you know, one of the greatest political journalists, cartoonists, and so on. Incredible guy. So it's super to be with you. And I see that Def Leppard shirt and I raise you with Pink Floyd. So that's all I can say. It's
so
early musical T-shirt poker.
I did want to bring this up. So when you released this book last year, I didn't get it till recently. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't able to get it when it came out. But I watched you on the show. I couldn't tell you what show it was. I saw you. It was a book promotion, and I saw the title. And my first thought was, oh, he's a sports fan, and it's a play on the '80s Washington Bullets before they changed the name to the Wizards. That's what I thought, right? Then it's a Clash song. I'm like, whoa, times. You're gonna tell me that Brother Prashad is a punk fan, and he used a Clash song to be the title. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So at some point we have to have a music discussion, because before the world shut down, that is what I did. I traveled all over the place playing loud, angry music. So.
Well, Jason, on Spotify, I have a playlist, which is an anti-imperialist punk playlist, which includes some American bands like the Dicks, and it includes British bands singing about the Malvinas Islands, and it has bands from the Caribbean, from South America. It's basically a punk rock list against imperialism.
Well, I'll have to send you some music to add to the playlist, because I definitely have been making some angry anti-imperialist music that is on Spotify.
Perfect. I will be listening to it as soon as you send it to me. Yeah.
No, real talk. So we have some questions for you that my wonderful co-host put together. We're very excited. And before Pascal, you even get started, I do want to say, shout out to Joe Sacco. First of all, I'll be totally honest. Joe Sacco sends a message, and I didn't think that it was Joe Sacco. Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, Joe Sacco. That wasn't. I'm thinking this is a gentleman named Joe Sacco. It took a second, and then I was like, "Oh shit, you're Joe Sacco." So he should show you that message. It is pretty funny. So Pascal, you want to go? Yes,
Comrade Vijay, thank you for coming on our show, and we have some questions to ask you, so we're going to get right to it. Mr. Prashad, during the period of the New Left in the 60s, we saw a major anti-Vietnam War movement, which was populated by radicals like the Black Panther Party, as well as the Students for a Democratic Society. However, in the 21st century, we have entered what seems like of the forever wars of the Middle East and in the Muslim world. Do you believe that anti-imperialism has lost salience as a political issue for Americans overall? And do you see the current young left as lacking critical engagement with the crimes of American empire?
Well, that's a big question. It's not a small question. And the first thing I suppose that one should say is that even during the high point of the anti-war movement, you know, the 1960s, 50s, 60s, 70s, there was various kinds of anti-war movements against militarism in the 1950s, against nuclear power and so on. It was always a very small movement in the United States. You know, let's be frank about that. When the US anti-war demonstrations, the mobilizations took place, the larger mobilizations, it was largely because of the draft. By the way, we're talking on the 30th of April. It's the 46th anniversary of the defeat of the United States government in Vietnam. This was the night when US embassy helicopters took off from Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City. So, I mean, I'm glad we're talking on the day that the US got its ass kicked by the Vietnamese peasants, essentially. And tomorrow, the United States begins what is supposed to be a withdrawal from Afghanistan, although I must say they're not really withdrawing. At any rate, it was always a small movement, never really large. One of the problems, and I deal with this in Washington Bullets, Pascal, one of the problems is that the United States denies that it's an empire. It just denies it. It says that it's doing things for human rights and it's doing things to help the world and this, that, and the other thing. But it denies that it's an empire. And that has an impact on people's understanding of their own government. A very large section of the US public believes that the US government is benevolent. This is a feeling that people have. So you're always going to be on the back foot when you try to challenge things. I'll give you an example. Bolivia, that was a coup d'etat against the government of our friend Evo Morales. It was a coup d'etat. But even people in the US left, magazines and so on, even people said, no, he overstayed his welcome. Let me ask you, Pascal, why is it that they complained that the first indigenous president in the Americas, Mr. Evo Morales, had overstayed his welcome? Nobody said that about Angela Merkel of Germany, who had been the chancellor of Germany longer than Evo Morales. Nobody has said that about Angela Merkel, who's leaving office this year. But they say it about him, This is what they say. They say, what gives you the right to be the president of Bolivia, standing up to our mining companies and so on? So people in the US said, oh my God, he's overstayed his welcome. Even in liberal circles, they lined up behind the State Department and said it's not a coup. It's hard to be an anti-imperialist in the US. It was always a narrow, small current. The bravery of people like W.E.B. Du Bois and so on, they rode against the current at that time. The Black Panther Party, who you mentioned, rode against the current on all these things. The defense of anti-colonial movements, national liberation movements, the defense of Kwame Nkrumah. It's not just Du Bois. I'm reading now the writings of Alphonsus Hunton, who had gone to Ghana, an African-American communist, had gone to Ghana to help Du Bois with the Encyclopedia Africana, gets deported from Ghana because of the coup against Kwame Nkrumah, comes back to the United States, and people are like, it's not a coup, he was a strong man. We got to understand it's hard to be anti-imperialist inside the belly of the beast.
Wow. Do you find that the current iteration of the left, the Sanders faction, the post-Occupy movement, progressives, whatever the term they choose, the Democratic Socialists of America, do you find them to be, are you optimistic about their particular value in challenging American empire? Or do you find that they're somewhat lacking, that the left publications, whether they are Jacobin or otherwise, in a very good critical materialist understanding of what's going on, particularly in the global South, which oftentimes some of them, perhaps out of racial chauvinism, will render to this third world fetishism in terms of understanding their importance?
See, it's a funny business. Look, we are in a funny place, right? Here's a situation. It's so easy for the US media to suddenly go all insane. Gaddafi is genocidal or Assad is genocidal. It's always somebody else who's genocidal. What did they kill? Maybe 200-300 people here, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. Okay, let's add the numbers up. The United States is on record. The United States government is on record for having killed over 1 million people in an illegal war against Iraq. Over 1 million people. But it's not the United States that's genocidal. Nobody says that about the US government. It's always somebody else. And it's often somebody who's not white. I'm not here to play some identity politics game, but I understand racism when I see it. It's easy to say, oh, look at that Arab. He's a ruthless, whatever. Meanwhile, what about Tony Blair? What about George W. Bush? What about Bill Clinton? These are all war criminals, but we don't think of it like that. It's got to be somebody out there who's the bad guy. I mean, the United States government is one of the most dangerous institutions on the world today. It's one of the most dangerous institutions. 800 military bases everywhere, hypersonic cruise missiles threatening everybody. Not only countries that can't stand up to the United States easily, like El Salvador, threatened right now, just last year, threatened by the US government. Not only do they threaten countries like El Salvador, but China. You want to go to war against China? The other day I spent talking to a friend of mine in Iraq, in Baghdad, a journalist who lives in what is now Sadr city, Baghdad. We were talking, and he said, it's a mess here and it's appalling and whatever. And then I said, look, they want to start a war against China. There's all this war drum, the drums of war beating and so on. He was like, they couldn't beat us. How are they going to beat the Chinese? And my only thought is in my head was, when a ruling class has such contempt for humanity, it really doesn't care about outcomes, Pascal. It doesn't care about outcomes. They have the power to really destroy countries. They don't care whether you or I agree with what they're doing, because they have such an immense advantage over information. If the United States starts a bombing war against anybody today, the New York Times, Washington Post, even so-called left publications will just line up behind the president and say, how presidential of you, and you're using US power for good. Ridiculous. Jacobin, you mentioned Jacobin. Jacobin recently ran an interview with an American or US academic about Xinjiang. I don't really follow these things in the US media because I don't think it's credible, but I was interested in this. The guy they interviewed used to work for USAID. He used to work for USAID. I mean, have some respect. You're going to talk about something like Xinjiang. Why not interview somebody even from Xinjiang, not from the World Uyghur Congress, which is essentially a CIA front organization now? Interview somebody in Xinjiang. Have some respect. Talk to some left-wing person in China. Find out something that's interesting. Why are you going to the USAID people? So, I know the field is complicated, Pascal. And the other day I had a conversation with some people in the DSA leadership. I got to say, this is not Michael Harrington's DSA, Pascal. These are children of migrants from El Salvador, from Puerto Rico, from other parts of the global south. They have a radical perspective on the world. They want to drive an agenda. Michael Harrington would be horrified with some of the leadership now in the DSA. So I don't take a position, DSA is this or DSA is that. DSA is a project. It's going to find its legs, Pascal. It's going to find its legs.
So you're making the argument that they're actually more radical than the founder of DSA himself.
No. On things like imperialism, Michael Harrington, who founded that current of politics, was a right-wing guy when it came to imperialism. I mean, he was totally for the Vietnam War type of situation and so on. Michael Harrington was not a radical.
One of his biggest projects was arguing why the left should celebrate the 4th of July. It was like he was a big thing about why the left needs to be patriotic and all of that other, blather.
Well, he didn't read Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is the clearest voice on the 4th of July. You don't even need a contemporary person. I recommend to everybody to go and find Frederick Douglass's address on, the 4th of July. Harrington was extraordinarily limited. What I find in the current DSA is there's a debate inside their organization. And I take debate seriously. I prefer a debate than to say, it's a perfect organization. You see, when you're debating inside an organization, people are developing. They're developing. I'm not saying it's going to fall out right, in the correct direction, but at least there's a debate, a discussion, and the type of people inside the organization, very different than what it used to be.
Okay, that's a fair analysis. I appreciate that. So let me ask you another question, Vijay. Do you believe that with the loss of Trump and the rise of the global coronavirus, that the dialectic between the global reactionary nationalist movement, i.e. Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson, Marine Le Pen, Modi, Duarte, that movement that gave birth to Trump, and the dialectic between them and the liberal globalists is now over? do you still see the reactionary nationalists as a serious contenders for political power in the leadership of nations?
I mean, it's a good question. Let's stay with the U.S. for a second. I heard the other day that Donald Trump, sitting in Florida, is plotting a comeback and is planning to run for election the next time. And I don't know if Biden is going to run again. I mean, good God, does the United States need that? The Trump versus Biden, the rematch in 3 and a bit years. So are they down? I don't think so. I think that the material conditions right now for the liberal wing of capitalism to maintain its power is just not there. So in the United States at present, I think, yes, the liberals are in some position. But you see, the liberals don't have the confidence to drive a liberal progressive agenda. They drive a liberal right of center agenda. So it's to some extent liberal, but even when they're out there saying we're going to do $1 trillion of spending, at the same time, they're going to bulk up the military. They're going to pursue this Cold War against China, this belligerence against China. Look at the rude, how Secretary of State Antony Blinken went to Anchorage, Alaska, and spoke so rudely to the Chinese diplomats. It's not, when you go and meet a diplomat, Pascal, you don't walk into the room and say, let me tell you about the world. You don't know anything. You're a barbarian. That was Antony Blinken's attitude. Generally, you go into a room and you say, nice to see you. It's our first meeting. We are both great countries. Where Alaska is the doorway to Asia for the United States. That's how they talk, Pascal. You and I are familiar with the level of, diplomatic non-speak. But Blinken went in there and said, you guys are rule breakers. Let me teach you what the rules are. That's a hugely arrogant way to behave. So you got liberals on the one side. They'll do some social spending, very important, all of it. But they're going to bulk up the military. They're going to be challenging people around the world. They're not going to advance a civilizational project that's different from the civilizational project that produced Trump in the first place. So in other words, they're going to keep creating the conditions, Pascal, for the return of a Trump. May not be a Trump exactly, but it's the return of a Trump. We are in a cycle now, a kind of cycle or spiral, a death spiral maybe, where we'll go between, on the one side, some right-wing liberalism and then right-wing this neo-fascism. And we are going to be in this death spiral unless a political project of the left can break this spiral and open a new door, new kind of history. And right now, I'm not altogether confident, Pascal, that new path, I'm not confident is going to open easily. It's going to take a lot of effort.
Do you think it's hard right now to get a true left project? Because as Pascal says, we don't have an organized left. We just have a bunch of leftists.
Now, on the 2nd of May, election results will come in India. And in the state of Kerala, which is a population 35 million, the communist bloc is going to win re-election. The communist government governed in the last 5-year period. It's the first time in Kerala since 1980 that any party is going to beat the incumbency problem and will be re-elected. So there's a little corner of the world. If you know Asterix comics, it's a little corner of Gaul where this little village of Asterix and Obelix is holding out against the Roman Empire. Well, in Kerala, we are holding out against the depredations of barbaric capitalism. So there is a little bit of hope. If you're talking about the United States, Jason, if you want to know about the United States, you know better than I what was done to Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders in the United States, Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom. I mean, these people ran a left social democratic program, basically. Bernie is not a communist. Come on, guys. Bernie is a left social democrat. On many issues, he's pretty good. Healthcare, increasing the social welfare. I mean, I'm all for that. Run, go, break through. What you need is not Bernie. You need a breakthrough. You see, if Bernie had become the candidate, maybe he would have been able to produce a new political force, young people, the working class, and so on. and driven a new kind of political dynamic. They didn't allow it because they are too scared. They would prefer this death spiral between right-wing liberals and neo-fascists. They prefer this death spiral than allow the left social democrats to start opening a door to the future. Imagine if Bernie had become the president and had put on the table for serious debate 50% cut in the US military budget, 50% cut, just, a haircut. Every institution in the United States has taken a haircut, 50% haircut. Put it on the table. Doesn't mean it'll pass. Doesn't mean it'll be taken seriously, but use your 4 years as president to push an agenda. You won't get reelected maybe, but let people remember this agenda. By the way, Carter, 76 to 80, Carter governed to the right of Nixon.
That's true.
Carter governed to the right of the Republican Party in 1972. Carter had a right-wing agenda, even domestic. Of course, international, horrible policy on Afghanistan, appalling policy on Nicaragua, but even domestic policy, Carter was to the right of Nixon. So you've not actually had a Democratic president come in there and just go Reagan on the country. Because Reagan went Reagan on the country, right? Reagan just came in and said, we're going to go a hard right agenda. I don't care what you feel or think or whatever. We have never had a Democratic president who goes right out to the left and say, I'm going to just demand, put this on the table, deal with it, America, 50% cut. Let's see.
No, Pascal
I actually want to address your affection for Bernie Sanders. Is that I did not support Bernie Sanders in 2016 because I frankly did not believe that he had a challenge to the American imperial project and that his socialism stopped at the water's edge. I did not feel that Bernie Sanders, and even in 2020, I don't think that Bernie Sanders would have in any way diminished the American imperial project. And frankly, I don't think any president will be able to get in that position and to be able to do that. You may disagree, but I'd like to hear your response on that, because I've never felt that him or his coterie of acolytes were particularly strong on the on American empire and what it means to challenge that particular institution.
You're right. I mean, far be it for me to say that Bernie is some sort of left-wing anti-imperialist. Quite the opposite. I mean, Bernie would, in that sense, be a better heir to Michael Harrington's legacy than any of the people in the DSA leadership now. That's for sure. That's true. On the other hand, the issue wasn't Bernie or what Bernie would do in office. The issue was, would a Bernie, or not Bernie, forget Bernie, let's not get held up on Bernie. Is it possible in the United States for some left social democratic force to appear that opens a path out of this death spiral between right-wing liberalism and the neo-fascists? Is it possible? I think that's the real question. Forget postmortems for Bernie, because that didn't happen. I mean, he didn't open the path. Is it possible for somebody to open that path? And I think obviously it's possible. The question is, what's the base for that path? What's the base? Is there a base for that path? Is there a constituency? Are people going to go out? You can't run a left agenda in an imperialist country in the core only on creating social benefits for the population. You got to run in a challenging way, talking about the fact that you need to create bridges in the United States rather than bases overseas. You've got to create healthcare systems in the United States rather than spend money overthrowing governments, in South America and Thailand and so on. You've got to run that kind of agenda, and we just don't see a left social democrat in the United States doing that. I mean, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez just doesn't do that. She just doesn't do that. She's in that sense a right-wing social democrat, not a left social democrat.
Do you think this? How do I word this? I feel Pascal and I have several conversations about off-air conversations about our feelings on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and that coterie, right? The Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, whoever else the media wants to call the squad. I definitely understand that that's kind of a media creation, right? The squad, as some sort of unit. It kind of feels like maybe they're a little too online. Like outside of Donald Trump, they might be the most online political figures that I've ever seen. And I wonder how that affects the way they even look at policy. We have a friend that comes in on our Saturday show who actually worked in, for a congressperson. And he actually gives us some very juicy off-air stories. But there's something to be said about the response to a lot of that younger group that you're bringing up. Because we agree, Pascal and I agree, the foreign policy that they talk about is trash. That's the nicest way I can put it.
We're entering May tomorrow, and then comes June. And I don't mean to give anybody a lesson on the calendar, but I just want to say that in June, the United Nations will consider a vote on Cuba again. And you see, the issue is, Cuba during this pandemic has, as you well know, sent doctors all around the world.
All over the world.
I did a webinar with doctors in many Caribbean countries, in Jamaica, in Belize, and so on. Talked to a young woman who's an emergency room doctor in a hot ward in Belize. Extraordinarily brave. I asked her, what do you miss? And she said, I miss my, 6-year-old child in Oriente in Cuba. And I said, what? She said, I talked to my child on a video chat, but I really miss. And even when I go back, I won't be able to see them for a while because I'll be in quarantine and so on. Extraordinary people, These are the people that the administration of Donald Trump in January placed on the state sponsors of terrorism list. The United States government, in the middle of a pandemic, decided to put Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism. The United States government, which is the largest arms exporter in the world, and Cuba, of course, exporting doctors. So the United States decides to put Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list. The test case, Jason, the test case for any squad or whatever one calls them is how they are going to stand up in the US Congress to defend Cuba and to attack this policy. Mr. Biden's press secretary, Jen Psaki, came out and said that Cuba is not a high priority for Mr. Biden. It's not a high priority. Are you kidding? When you were vice president, at least Obama tried to move some kind of humane policy on Cuba. At the very least, Biden should go back to Obama. I'm not asking Biden to become a revolutionary, but even on this, Jason, even on this, even revert to Obama. Where are the voices?
But brother Prashad, we played a clip that Pascal.
Don't play. Revert for Obama is first of all, Obama's pivot to Cuba was a direct reaction to the fact that Russia had forgiven Cuba's debt and that the BRICS were actually pivoting to Latin and South America. There was
I don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not saying Obama's pivot to Cuba is a good thing or even a positive thing. I'm merely saying that even the liberal imperialist position of Obama is not being taken by Biden. Biden is preferring to sit on the Trump policy, which directly calls Cuba a state sponsor. They're not. So where are these people? Where is Talib? Where is Ilhan Omar? Where is AOC? Why aren't they standing up and saying, what the hell? Why is Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list? Cuba is sending doctors and so on. See, this is an important issue for the United States. The United States has tried to suffocate 11 million people since 1959. The test of your progressivism or whatever, radicalism, whatever you call it in the United States is whether you defend the Cuban Revolution's right to survive. And I just don't see any of these squad people willing to come there or to say that the regime change policies against Venezuela is out of line. It's against everything that the world believes. Every year since the 1990s, every single country almost has voted in the UN to end the blockade of Cuba. I would like one of these, left of center people to come out there and say, let's join the rest of the world community and vote in the UN. Let's just have them say it. Let's just have them say it. They just don't. So then I wonder, I scratch my head and say, where's the Which left-wing person is sitting in Congress? I don't see them.
Well, remember, there's a clip of Joe Biden talking about not caring if Haiti falls into the ocean. I feel like he just doesn't care. He has a very Trump-esque view, in my opinion, of the Caribbean.
That is
Biden's the only person. Biden is the only person who could say something more offensive about Haiti than Trump.
I mean, didn't even know he said that, frankly. And, obviously people who watch your show know about Haiti, but I just want to say this just for the hell of it, guys, if you don't mind. But, Haiti basically beats the planter class in 1804, beats the planter class. And if you think that Cuba has suffered blockade since 1859, Haiti has suffered a blockade since 1804. C.L.R. James, one of the great Trinidadian Marxists, wrote the best book on the Haitian Revolution. It's called The Black Jacobins. In 1963, and I highly recommend it to everybody, it's called The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. In 1963, James wrote a afterword to a new edition. The afterword is called From Toussaint Louverture, one of the main leaders of the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804. He called the afterword From Toussaint Louverture to Fidel Castro.
Yep.
And he drew a straight line from the Haitian Revolution to the Cuban Revolution. So, guys, when you say that Biden said something so offensively racist as that, genocidally racist as that, look at that. That's the attitude to Haiti. That's the attitude to Cuba. What democratic, liberal, nothing. Nothing. I don't see it, guys. I just don't see it. I just don't see it.
I agree with you. I feel like someone said in the chat, and I put the message up on the screen that they don't want internet influencers in government positions. And there's something to be said about a kind of perpetually online generation that some of the younger ones actually belong to. And because of that, that's kind of how they got elected, right? They made really cool, catchy videos that went viral. There's no older politician that knows how to do that well, so there's something to be said about them being internet influencers and not having really good foreign policy. I think their idea of foreign policy is really horrible. Like, again, Pascal and I talk about it quite frankly off camera. Depending who we have on the show, we'll talk about it on camera, because we actually have a Foreign Policy Thursday where we get into these discussions. But I do want to ask one question that was in the chat from our friend Jean Bajlan, who asks, what are your feelings on Rojava?
Right. That's interesting. That's getting into the thickets now. So for those who may not know, the Kurdish population in West Asia is really distributed, because there is no Kurdish country between Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and there's also a diaspora and so on. But during the war in Syria, northeastern Syria, and actually most of the Syrian-Turkish border, but mainly northeastern Syria, was a place where the Syrian Arab army, retreated back to defend Damascus and some of the cities in southern Syria, including Dara and so on, and left the northeastern part to the Kurdish political parties, which had fashioned a militia group called the YPG, which is a kind of People's Protection Army, People's Protection Group, which had emerged up there, basically controlled by northern Syrian Kurdish political forces. Well, because they had now been able to take charge of that area, they constituted themselves as an independent republic, or at least an autonomous region called Rojava. And this region, was, of course, not able to survive by itself. One of the interesting problems that the Kurdish movement faces is that a large majority of Kurds who live in Turkey live in Istanbul and in the neighboring areas of Istanbul. Over 1 million or so In fact, people say that the working class in Istanbul is basically Kurdish. And that population is not prepared to go and live in southeastern Turkey, in the area contiguous to Rojava. So on the one side, you had a Turkish government highly opposed to any move of Kurdish autonomy. On the other side, you had the Syrian army, which had basically just moved away from that area. So this Rojava that was created, guys, was always a temporary solution. It was never going to be permanent because, neither Turkey nor Syria were prepared to allow an independent Kurdish republic to be created there. The question has been for the Kurdish leadership is not any longer actually creating an independent country. They're fighting for autonomy or minority rights or one or the above. Even in Iraqi Kurdistan, that is in northern Iraq, in the towns of Erbil and Kirkuk and so on, there's no expectation of creating an independent country. It's rights, not country. So my sense is that in the United States, the left, I think, exaggerated Rojava as if it was going to be, a sort of anarchist paradise or whatever. But even the people there were not expecting this to be a permanent country, to emerge. They were using that to leverage for more rights for the Kurds inside Syria and Kurds inside Turkey. In fact, the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, their head, who's been in prison for a long time, Abdullah Öcalan, he is out there for more rights for the Kurdish people, not for independence any longer. Just a few days ago, the main political party of the Kurdish of the Turkish left and also of Kurdish emancipation, the People's Democratic Party, HDP, 108 members of that party, including all the leaders, were in a court because the Turkish government is trying to ban their party. I mean, it's a terrible situation between Turkey and the anvil of Turkey and the hammer of the war in Syria. The Kurds are having it tough, fellas, tough. And let's not just idealize things, Rojava, it's the future and so on. It was tough in Rojava, and the town of Kobane was obliterated by US bombing. It was obliterated by the war against ISIS. That was a principal town in Rojava. So I don't want to go into this direction of, it's a paradise and so on. It's not true, and we shouldn't exaggerate these things that happen in different countries. When the Italian communists went to meet Ho Chi Minh in the mid-60s, few years before he died, they asked him, how do we help you? And Ho Chi Minh said, we don't need your help. Go home and make a revolution.
Damn.
Profound words. So I have some more questions for you. Now, I've heard you state that there is a crisis of capital caused by the excesses of neoliberalism on several programs. Yet we know that capitalism in the last century has gone through many crises and has been able to reify and reproduce itself, even thwarting counter-hegemons like the Soviet Union. Do you think it is prudent for the left to hinge its ability to politically expand its adherence to the crisis of capitalism theory, as opposed to competing with ideological infrastructure of capitalism through both political agitation and the marketplace of ideas? In other words, this notion of we're waiting for the crisis of capitalism, which I've been hearing the left say my whole adult life, becomes rather kind of stale, and to me is a demonstration of fecklessness on the left, instead of engaging capitalism when it works or doesn't work. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really smart question, Pascal. And I got to first admit that I try every year, but every once in a while I go back and I read Marxist Capital. I find it, I've read it so many times. I don't have that sort of, when you first ride a bicycle, you fall a lot. And after you learned how to ride the bicycle, it's a joy, you don't fall and so on. So when I'm reading Capital, I'm not falling. I'm not like a young kid on a bike anymore. And there's a chapter in Capital. In the English edition, it's chapter 32. It's a really important chapter. And what Marx argues in that chapter is that he argues that the productive forces of capitalism develop and they run into a crisis situation. That's the objective crisis. There's a crisis in capitalism, which the forces of capitalism and the class that benefits from it are able to reshape, they are able to improve things using the latest science, best socialization of labor, and so on. They can exit crises in various ways, but nonetheless, the system keeps going into crisis. It's a little bit like a bad car that, you turn it on, you drive, it stalls. You remember, if you drove stick shift, the clutch collapses, and then you start it again, it goes again, the clutch collapses, you start it again, and so on. I don't know if you've driven a diesel manual car. Manual shift diesel often has that problem, an old car. So capitalism is a little like that. The problem that Marx says is that capitalism might have objective crises. It can recover from those crises. It doesn't inexorably collapse and become socialism. For that, you need the subjective side of history. Somebody has to drive an agenda. You have to lift the crisis into opportunity for the working class, and so on. And the weakness of the subjective side is something to behold. And globalization has weakened trade unions. Our people's movements are weak. People unable to unite around a program, together. The left constantly bickering. Look at Brazil, where you've got Jair Bolsonaro. What a nightmare of a character. It's a kind of government of zombies. And yet the left can't get it together. Left cannot find a program to unite behind. That's not just a problem of why aren't they doing it, and so on. This is a structural problem that the left faces around the world. In this period of globalization, in this period of rising aspirations, as a consequence of, like goods and services all over the place, credit available for people to buy things. You may not be able to afford it on your salary, but you have a credit card. Fine, you go into debt, but you can keep going into debt. And that creates bizarre aspirations and so on. Your class consciousness erodes. So there's a problem on the subjective side of history. One has to come back, go amongst the people, must talk about, building a new kind of agenda, new kind of project. Jason, you read from my book, I mentioned the issue of illicit tax havens, between 32 and 37 trillion dollars sitting in Liechtenstein and Dubai and Cayman Islands and so on. I mean, we need to take our pitchforks and go and grab that money. We need a project, guys. You need a project. You can't just be against capitalism. What are we for? You got to unite around a project. And I think that's part of what, shows like yours are about. They're about articulating a debate, a discussion, amplifying people's voices, trying to think about what is the new left project? What is the project that people should unite around? Can't just unite around no, we are against this. You've got to unite around yes. Right?
I like that. It actually in that same chapter, you end with this, which I really, really liked. You say, Washington's bullets are sleek and dangerous. They intimidate and they create loyalties out of fear. Their antidote is hope. The kind of hope that came to us in 1964 as the Colombian Civil War opened a new phase. And the poet Mario, how do you say his name?
Let me just check, because remember,
Arbelez.
Mario Arbelez.
Yeah, Arbelez sang of another future. And then you have the
that's a beautiful poem, right?
The beautiful, a very beautiful poem. There is something to be said about people always saying no and just being kind of nihilistic, and there has to be a message of hope. I'm a very big believer in, if you don't have a message of hope in whatever it is you're doing, then people are going to get tired of being angry, and nothing really is going to happen when you don't have hope. So I'm a huge believer in that. I don't want to derail Pascal's questions because we have
a good super chat question from Joanna here.
Joanna threw a super chat down. Vijay often brings up.
Wait a minute. What is a super chat? In case
super chat is someone who actually pays to ask a question. They contribute to the podcast by contributing.
That's amazing. Okay. Amazing, guys. I'm learning some of these skills. Great.
Yeah, we don't get too many, and when we do, we get pretty excited. So
that's nice.
Joanna asked. Joanna is a friend of show. Vijay often brings up the dislocation of the means of production, where the component parts of a product are built around the world. How can we fight capitalists who fracture labor in this way?
Well, first I have to say that Joanna, this is for you. That's really amazing. That I like the super chat business. Yeah, it's amazing. Right?
Yeah, this shit's
Amazing.
pretty cool. We don't do it right. To be honest, we don't do it right because the people that actually are real good about it, they won't even like put your comment up unless you fucking send a super chat, and we're not about that.
Wow. Well, I mean, look, before I answer this question, because it's a question that means a lot to me, I just want to say that I met Jason and Pascal today. We are fast friends, and I like this podcast a lot already, a lot already, because we're able to talk about all kinds of crazy stuff, and that's great. And I just think that your podcast must be supported, and I hope everybody does a super chat of some amount.
Hey, we're not going to stop you from shilling.
No, I just feel like, why not?
Hey, and also, Brother Vijay, we're both Leos. You are 4 days.
My father was a Leo.
Which way are you? Are you ahead of me or behind me?
I'm behind you. August 19th. You're August 14th. I saw that when I was doing the bio for your thing.
August is a great month. And whatever they say about Leos, we're not altogether bad people. Jason,
Obama's a Leo.
That doesn't matter.
Bill Clinton is born on my birthday.
For me.
Bill Clinton is born on my birthday.
Oh my God.
We don't need to know those things. But Jason and I enjoy being Leos. We reject Obama and Clinton. We've excommunicated them from Leodom. It's as simple as that. Joanna's question is excellent because it's an intuitive thing. We know, for instance, that things that we have around us, and I'm afraid I don't really have any. Oh well, I have a very nice Muji pencil. Muji is I should not say anything about the store because it sounds like I'm a bloody advertiser for it. But I have a pencil, and this pencil is made in 5 or 6 different places. The rubber, the eraser is made somewhere, the metal, blah, blah, blah. Things are made in different places. This is what we call disarticulated production. What it means is that the firm can break up one factory into 10 factories. This has at least 2 or 3 different implications. The first implication is that no factory, if it goes on strike, can hold up the whole production line because the firm will source that thing. Let's say the lead pencil, the pencil lead, can source it from 2 or 3 places. So if you go on strike, they source it from somewhere else, they wipe you out. So it's not really useful. Strike as a weapon is taken away. Secondly, because the factory is broken up into 5 or 6, 8 different places, each factory requires less investment than one big factory, which means that sometimes firms don't even invest in the production of factory. They just subcontract everything. Nike, for instance, doesn't make any shoes. Apple doesn't make computers. That's made by subcontractors. Nike shoes are made by subcontractors. So they don't even invest in the world. It's what I call an investment strike. They've gone on strike. They don't invest. But what this means is because strike activity, this act of striking, has basically been taken away from workers, trade unionism, whatever you think, was the anchor of the left. That's where our mass struggles developed from, out of trade unionism. Unions are much weaker now, and I don't have to tell you that. You know that. The reason they're weaker is because of this disarticulation of production. How do you fight that? And I'm going to give you 2 basic things for discussion and debate. One is that the global commodity chain, that means the whole transportation and communication network that holds this factory in 5, 8 places together, there are vulnerabilities in that system. The vulnerabilities are at transport hubs. It's very important to organize dock workers, very important to organize transportation workers, truck drivers, and so on. That's one area. If those people go on strike, it closes the whole system down. And we've seen that happen in many cases where particularly dock workers have gone on strike. It holds everything up. Secondly, the workers who work on database systems, data entry systems, particularly in places like in India, Malaysia, and so on, they need to be organize, because they can really jam up the system. They can really hold things up. So strikes in these particular nodes, these nodes of some vulnerability for the system, that's important. But more than anything else, because we can't organize at the work site, the working class has to be organized where it lives. And this means that it has to be organized in neighborhoods, it has to be organized for community development things, and so on. Like during the pandemic, in many parts of the world, neighborhood organization was the way mutual aid was provided. I hope that organization continues. So the working class may not be now organized in the place of work. It might have to be organized where people live. It's important in a place like the United States to take lessons from the past. In the 1930s, the Communist Party developed a platform called the Unemployed Councils, the Union of the Unemployed. I think it's important now to have unions of unemployed, unions of precarious workers, and so on, because this is about political development. You may not be able to go on strike. For that, you rely on these nodal workers, at important places. I don't know how many of you watched the Boots Riley film.
It was filmed where I live.
Okay. So you know it well.
Yeah.
It's a funny film because Boots, in that film, he goes after these precarious workers and shows what union activity could look like, and how difficult it is to build power for working people. So it's possible. We have to think cleverly, you got to think cleverly. You got to think where are the vulnerabilities in a system? And capitalism knows about its vulnerabilities. It's constantly stress testing things, trying to repair things, and so on. But we have to be as clever as our adversary. In fact, cleverer.
I want to ask one more question, Vijay, from the chat. This gentleman, I'm trying to find it right now. I don't want to butcher your name. Is it Anouk? It's not like you can answer me. I'm so sorry. I hope I'm saying it right. Send me a message if I've said it wrong, and you can yell at me in the message. Vijay, why do you feel pessimistically about the left in Brazil? Any thoughts you have on Lula's release? Solidarity from Boston.
So I run a research institute called Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Please, guys, go to our website, thetricontinental.org. You can super chat us there if you'd like.
I'm going to put a link to it right now on the chat.
It's a possibility. Yes. So we have an office in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Next month in May, that is, from May Day tomorrow. Happy May Day, by the way. Next month, we'll release a dossier, which is our flagship text, comes every month, on the state of the Brazilian left. We've interviewed the leader of the Workers' Party, Gleisi Hoffmann. We've interviewed leaders of the landless workers movement. We've interviewed people from PSOL, a whole bunch of different political organizations. And they talk about the complexities of the left, the debate in the Brazilian left between creating a popular front or a left front and creating a broad front or a united front from above. These are old debates that go back to the Communist International in the 1920s, but they're present in Brazil now. In Brazil, it's not called a united front versus popular front. It's called the debate between the broad front and the left front. And I'm not pessimistic about the left, but I really want to be, I just don't want to use the word pessimistic, but I want to be rational about the left. I want to be precise about it. I don't want to exaggerate anything. The possibility of Lula coming back to run against Bolsonaro next year is amazing. But Lula can't run from above. Lula needs a political organization, a base. Lula needs to have, somebody behind him building power of the working class and the peasantry. And I just feel like we need to see what the Workers' Party can do, what the allied groups of the left can do, including, the landless workers movement, the MST, and so on. You win power from the base, not from above. And Lula's entry into the race is going to change some of the feeling, the texture of Brazilian politics. It already has. But you need to win from below, guys. You really need to win from below.
Well, on that note, we have hit an hour. I have to ask the question. People would be mad at me if I don't ask the question. And if you can't, we totally understand because you are in a different country. We do a thing when the show's over after an hour for our patrons. We do what we call the after hours. And it's patrons only. And we kind of keep the conversation going. We talk a little bit more shit in the after hours because it's a little more interactive with the chat. But as you can see from the people in the chat, it is a fun shit talk session. So if you could give us 20, we'll be grateful. If you can't, brother, we understand.
No. I mean, you're asking me so nicely, Jason. 20 minutes is hardly anything. Of course, I'll stay with you for 20 minutes.
Oh, you can give us more if you want.
No, it's okay, Pascal.
It's late. It's late. It's a big time difference where he's at. It's a big time.
No, I mean, I'm just thinking Pascal is a good negotiator. Yeah, I like that. I like the negotiation skills. But you remember one of the key films of understanding how to do politics is Godfather 1, 2, and 3.
Love it. My favorite movie.
Right? You learn everything about politics. And the key line there, be careful with negotiations because it sometimes ends with the key line. Luca Brasi sleeps with the fishes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
I remember that scene and that movie all too well. I have recently... What is it? Pascal should be in the squad. What squad? The squad? Like with AOC and them? That's fucked up.
That'll be interesting. Vijay, Jason is going to email you the link for our next segment, which is the patrons only. And we'll carry forth the conversation because as everyone knows, and Jason knows, I still have more questions.
Okay. See you after hours, as they say.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.